So I'm going to now let Jay start his presentation and talk to us about sustainability. Thank you.
What I want to talk about is what a sustainable workspace means for business, how we drive productivity, how we drive engaged and happy employees. And CARS started us on a journey. One of the first sustainable design jobs we got as a dedicated commission, we're engineers, to develop a building which was answerable to the environment was for the 2000 Olympics. And one of the things they did was they moved the Royal Agriculture Showground from Moore Park Gardens in Sydney to Homebush, and they used that facility temporarily for the main press centre. The rest of the time it's used for the Easter show, and they bring prize balls in there and they occupy these environments. And we designed pavilions which were unlike what the prescriptive view of pavilions would be, which is usually dark, mechanically ventilated. We brought in natural light, we brought in fresh air. We designed the fresh air in such a way that it poured across where the animals were, removed the ammonia, odours, and then straight up the chimney. And we got the most powerful bit of post-occupancy feedback we've ever received. We didn't solicit it. CSRO stood up and said these will never work. We measured all the temperatures, they worked. All the airflows validated. But the best bit of evidence we got was the report of the show in the Sydney Morning Herald afterwards said there'd never been a sick animal since they moved. So usually cattle occupy these things, they're prize animals, they go on show. First day, the vet's extremely busy dealing with flu. They give all the animals flu shots because they all share diseases. In these pavilions, not a single sick animal for the entire duration of a show. If we can do that for animals, imagine what we can do for people. And that's kind of a bit strange that we have a very standard a good job done. So physiological impacts. This is the human articulation of the system we did. We put in a system which provided single pass fresh air, so all the pollutants moved out from the odour zone. The way we normally design buildings is we have a very equitable distribution of pollutants around the entire building. So if you sneeze, it goes around and it's shared with everyone else. If there's any form of off-gassing from the furniture, it gets spread nice and easy around the building. So you might know if you've been in a multi-storey building and someone else is fitting out the workspace and they've got painters in, you can smell it on your floor. That's a really nasty way to run things. A very famous Danish professor who's sadly passed away, Ollie Fanger, he described the process of breathing air in an office building as being akin to drinking water from public swimming baths, full of bioeffluents. So we know we can design systems which are better for people to breathe and function. If I increase the fresh air to a typing pool by a factor of 2, I improve typing speed and accuracy by 2.8%. Physics, blind test. I also know that your ability to interpret written information is because your brain's working overtime to block that sensation out. So if we can design workspaces which don't require so much brain capacity to filter out the bad stuff, you've got a better chance of focusing on the task at hand. So there are some definite physiological impacts which are currently ignored in workplace design. But more intriguingly, I think, are the psychological impacts. We design physical-based systems on the basis that we get physical reactions. And actually, there's a strong psychology to workplace design which affects the physical systems too. This is a graph showing your daily circadian rhythm, that process whereby you naturally get less performing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Our body's sleep-wake cycle is not strictly tuned for 24 hours. And one of the problems we have, and it's best articulated by jet lag, is when your body's natural rhythm gets out of sync with the rhythm of the day as interpreted in the place you're in, you feel bad. And yet we put people in office environments where they get no connection to the outside. They don't know what time of day it is. They don't get to see the changing seasons, and therefore we have a thing called sick building syndrome and seasonal adjusted disorder. So we can do a lot better in terms of understanding how psychology interacts with people's acceptance of systems. Some of the best research in the world on thermal comfort comes out of Macquarie University by a guy called Dr. Richard Didier. He has demonstrated quite clearly that there are two measures of comfort. One of them is when you're in a sealed glass box and you become very intolerant. That's where we get the 21 to 24 degrees we want in an office. As soon as you allow an individual personal control over their ventilation device, whether it's opening a window or changing it, your tolerance broadens considerably because you have a response loop and you're no longer subservient to whatever the system spits out at you. Jacqueline mentioned diversity in workspaces. It's ludicrous to think that everyone in the workspace is going to appreciate the same comfort condition. It just does not make sense. And yet we go for this homogeneous design for lighting and air conditioning systems as if it's the pinnacle of what we're able to do. It's so far from best practice, it's not funny. So we are realists. Whilst we understand this stuff and we can talk till we're blue in the face about the benefits of doing this, someone has to buy it for us. So we need to buy it from us. So we need to understand the business case. The business case is really quite simple. If I look at, and I run a balance sheet, if I look at the cost in my organisation, and in the current markets, saving money has been quite important. So you go down and you draw down and you work out what cost savings are. 55% of my cost is employment. It's the people. 0.5% of my cost is my utility bills. I'm going to get nowhere by trying to save money on fuel costs. Costs are quite real. The difficulty we have is the value of the equation, the value is with the tenant, not the developer, not the building owner. And that's where we have this common problem in the industry of split incentive. Who really drives the outcomes? So what I wanted to do is walk you through a few examples. Office, I figured offices are quite relevant to this discussion, so I'll bring a couple in. More importantly, I'm only going to show you ones which were measured, and we have some results, because too much of the good work is undermined by people talking spuriously about anecdotal evidence and case study A to B, and this happened, and we don't really know what the physical circumstances were. This building was done for the global headquarters of Lendlease in Sydney, opened in 2004, so it's been running for 6 years now. It consumes 50% less carbon than the average Sydney office building. So it's one of the lowest energy office buildings in Australia. It's not a substandard environment. It's slick. It got lots of headlines. One of my favourite quotes, building is done for design what Tarantino did for Pulp Fiction. As a humble engineer, you could have no greater accolade because Tarantino's cool. And this is the result. They measured pre-occupancy at their old headquarters, Australia Square, which if you know Sydney, Australia Square is the round building, designed by Harry Seidler, which was iconic of its day, one of the first high-rises, and 30 of the bonds for stuff in green here. That's quite dramatic improvements. But the reason Lendlease did this was they wanted to attach innovation back into their brand, which they've done very successfully. But they also engaged their staff and said, what are the top 2 drivers you would like us to focus on when we move you from your old location to your new location? The staff told them 2 priorities, greenhouse gas mitigation and employee health. So they had an incredible story to engage their staff with as to why they were moving all that from a nice high-rise building to a fringe CBD building in a developing part of the town. So it was really quite important for them in terms of change management. CH2, closer to home, world's greenest building, question mark. I think everyone makes that sort of claim. What's really interesting with CH2 is Melbourne City Council wanted to do something very different. They delivered CH2 with funds from a public investment pool. They sold a utility many years ago. That money's banked. They can only invest that money if they meet a certain financial yield. I think the number was 8%. We had to deliver a very crazy building with quite a high cost premium. Both the tenant and the building owner, and therefore we can maybe capitalise the building occupant benefits into the building spend. And how much money is that worth? So we surveyed the majority of the world's research in terms of productivity impacts, and we graded them by how well they've been peer-reviewed, whether they're subjective or very objective, blind tests or otherwise. And then we gave Melbourne City Council bookends. If you believe all the science, optimistically, you're going to save millions. If you're very conservative and you say, well, I'm going to discount that, you're going to save less. We made a decision to capitalise 4.8% productivity benefits into the building spend over 20 years. So it's quite significant. What they actually got was a measured 10.8% improvement versus their existing headquarters, exceeded it by a factor of 2. And for those of you who recall that time, probably about 2008 in Melbourne, Melbourne City Council took a scythe through their staff and lost about half their senior executives. So it wasn't a very happy workspace morale-wise for issues of management, but the physical aspects of the building helped them immensely in terms of the results. These sort of things, I think everyone can understand. I don't know if you can read that. Measurement of health symptoms, we've got not a single incidence in hoarse, dry or sore throats in either summer or winter, just not prevalent. And we're dealing with civil servants, government employees here. If anyone's going to complain, they will do. So this sort of stuff's really quite valuable. I mentioned a caution with regard to anecdotal evidence. However, I do like the fact that each of these buildings has a very powerful story once you have the numbers. This facility here is called 1 Shelley Street. It's a new global headquarters for Macquarie Bank. Houses about 25% of their global workforce. So they moved 25% of their global staff into this new building where nobody has their own desk. It's all the only complaint they'd had about the building was that bing, the lifts made when you pressed the button was too loud. I've never ever seen anyone move into a building where they don't get complaints about the air conditioning, the lights being too bright, anything like that. So this is a really interesting workspace in terms of what it's done for their staff engagement. Other anecdotal evidence, and this one I think is quite interesting. CH2, I got pulled aside by Rob Adams, who was the director responsible for the project a few years ago. He said, I'd like you to meet someone, and he introduced me to the lady from Rentokil who maintains the plants. And anyone who's got indoor plants knows that you bring in Rentokil and they swap them out a little bit sickly, pull out the old plants, bring in the new ones, and everything's good again. The lady from Rentokil hadn't replaced a single plant, and her whole time was taken up trimming the new growth. She'd never seen plants grow so quickly. And same story for a similar building in Canberra. I walked senators around, and what we have essentially is a new version of a canary in the coal mine. If buildings can't keep plants healthy, how can we expect them to be functional workspaces for people? It does not make sense. So why do we still have a fairly retarded market? I take it you're all familiar with sort of innovation adoption curve. We have some innovators, but the majority of the market, particularly in property development, leasing, ownership, are laggards, late majority. And really, they will respond when the tenants demand it and will accept nothing less. As long as they can carry on supplying space with substandard services or systems which could do better, they'll carry on doing it because it's lowest first cost and least effort. There's no innovation involved. It's all fairly straightforward. So we have a market problem. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the impact of sustainability on an organisation. And we don't do organisational consulting. We don't do management consulting. I can only talk about our own experience. So we realised maybe 10 years ago now, maybe a bit earlier, that we as building engineers, if we weren't geared up to address sustainable buildings, we would have a finite lifespan. Our future would be about delivering sustainable buildings. So we had to be the first people to organise the business to be best positioned to deliver the best green buildings. And we've been relatively successful. Most of the sort of buildings you may recognise as being iconic green buildings have our name on them somewhere. So it's been good. But we've done something very, very careful and very challenging for our organisation. We dealt with it as a cultural problem. Rather than print up brochures saying we do green engineering now, rather than sending out a memo to our staff or a practice notes, we called them saying, this is the way we want you to behave now, stop what you're doing and do something different. We knew it was never going to work. We had to get people to think about sustainability as part of a culture, part of the value system. And if we get the value system right, we don't need any of the coercion tools, we don't need any green committees in our offices. They start greening our own operations, and then you get this incredible engagement because people think they're on a journey and they become quite proud when they get buildings which get recognised. And we were the first business in Asia Pacific to go 100% carbon neutral. We bought voluntary offsets, and the gold standard offsets off the international market. And we thought that was quite good. We're being corporately responsible, and it's good for branding. We get to use a little symbol which isn't on that slide, which says we are carbon neutral, and it looks good. The day we launched that scheme, we had a staff member come to us and said, "This is really good. Can I offset my own home emissions through the corporate scheme?" And we had not anticipated there'd be any dialogue for that whatsoever. And we said, "Yes, of course you can." He gets some wholesale. And then we realised we have a tax issue. But we work on the basis that it would be a very brave tax office which takes us on for allowing people to slowly sacrifice carbon offsets. And the most significant one was our approach to workspace. Since 2000, every workspace we've done has had, wherever possible, recycled furniture, low off-gassing materials. And our preference now, some of you may know this building, this is at the corner of Swanson and Burke Streets, mid-city centre. We went into this building when it was a dilapidated old retail space. I think it was Melbourne's first department store originally. But it has some beautiful high ceilings. We picked it up for dirt cheap rent, and we threw all the money in the fit out and created a really nice environment. And every time we move an office into a new space, we say raise the bar. Raise the bar again, show us what we can do new. And we need to get engineers to break out of their cubicles and collaborate and be open to new ideas. So this is a physical articulation of the way we want people to behave. Engineers who prefer to sit in a U-shaped desk with high partitions so they don't have to see the person opposite, now go and work somewhere else, which is great news for us. We therefore attract the sort of people who will feed the business we want to become. So I will wrap up. And I think I feel somewhat embarrassed that I've talked about sustainability, but I haven't really discussed ecology issues. This slide here is from Al Gore's slide deck, and it shows if we take all the water on the Earth, all the oceans, all the rivers, all the steam, I'm not sure what I did there, all the snow melt, and we put it in a volume, that's how much water we have as a finite resource compared to the volume of the Earth. It's really quite sobering. I'm convinced that sustainability is not a fad, and whilst Rod trashed his CPRS legislation yesterday, which is very unfortunate, there is still public support for doing stuff which is good for the environment. In fact, I'm surveying the other 80% still. We will have to adapt to sustainability because our employees demand it. And one of the things we've done is we've created such a demanding culture that when we've got employees locked into a building which is fairly average because we're least committed, we get hell for it because they know there's better ways to design workspaces. So I think as people become more educated about what's popular, we'll have no choice but to respond. And I think it's a very dangerous business which gets dragged on this journey rather than takes all the advantage of being a leader and take them a step forward on behalf of its employee and gains all the environmental benefits and engagement benefits which come with that. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Che. A couple of points that struck me about that was the, which I think seems obvious to you working in the area, but I've worked a lot on the behavior side of the psychology of space, but these actually very tangible, measurable links between physical health, just how many colds people get and how bad they feel at the end of the day, and sustainable environments, I think is something that perhaps we need to be more aware of, really.